Welcome to Neighbors and Friends, a sometime program that operates within the realm of education. Our guest today is Alan Tumolillo, who is teacher of physics at Columbia High School in Maplewood. Welcome, Alan. It's nice to see you.
Nice to be here. How are you?
I'm terrific. One of Alan's wonderful achievements was being the sponsor of the robotics team that, for the first year of its existence, went to the International Robotics competition in St. Louis, Missouri, and came in second in the world in robotics. Quite an achievement for a collection of high school students from a little suburb in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
How did you pull that off, anyway?
Well, there was a couple parents who were very interested in promoting robotics, and they went around to the district and hit all the buttons they could, and they talked with our science chairman, Mr. Levin, who approached me and asked if I'd be willing to be the advisor to the club. I said, sure, and a whole bunch of kids joined up. We started in the fall of 2010, and it was quite a collection of kids. And it wasn't a big club, it was about 10 or 12 kids. And every kid from first to last was really driven, really motivated to do well in this. They really loved robotics. They were all kids who, when they were younger, put things together with Legos and built things and stuff.
And they represented each of the 4 years of the high school, did they not?
We didn't have any seniors. We had only
Really?
underclassmen. The
That's
core group
amazing.
was, we had 2 or 3 juniors, and the rest were sophomores and freshmen. And so everybody returned this past year. So in their first year, they worked really hard, and they were very clever, and they built a terrific robot. And at the beginning of the year, the robot, you have these non-counting scrimmages. You go out and you just see how you're doing, and they're getting clobbered. And the robot would be torn to shreds. But they kept at it, and by January, the robot had finally been adjusted to the way they needed it, and it won enough so they could get into the state tournament at NJIT in February of 2011. So they marched into NJIT, and there were, I believe there were 48 teams in that tournament.
Wow.
Break it into 2 divisions, and at the end of the initial round, the Columbia team was in first place in its division. And so they'd beaten teams of long standing, teams that had been around for years and were quite good. And the way the tournament works in robotics is the top 4 teams in each division pick 2 more partners to go into the next round. And so Columbia picked these 2 other teams, one of which was really a very strong team. And in the playoff round, there are 2 robots at a time playing 2 on the other side. And they won the quarterfinals, semifinals, and they ended up in the championship match. And they won that match, best 2 out of 3. And being captain of the alliance, they got an automatic bid to go to the World Championship in St. Louis. And there, now we're going against fabulous teams from all over the country and around the world. There's several thousand teams in the division. So they were in the top 64 teams in the world. And they got picked to be part of the alliance, and their alliance won this quarterfinals and semifinals. So they go to the World Championship match, the top 6 teams in the world. And they couldn't pull it off, but they turned out that their robot was the number 2 scoring robot in the world at that point.
Wow.
And the number 1 was on the other team. And it was a fabulous little robot. And but they state championship, 2nd place alliance in the world. They won some design awards. It really helped this school.
Sure.
Got a lot of kids interested. It's helped promote science. I've had teachers tell me, you know, the robotics club sort of made science cool again. And so this past year, we had the largest number of kids who ever took the qualifying exam for AP chemistry in level 5, largest in the history of the school. We had the largest science fair this past year in the history of the school. And things look like it's just going to get bigger. We got more kids interested in science. And what was nice about it, to be blunt, this is a secret, you don't tell your audience.
I promise.
I didn't have to do anything. I just sit there and watch these kids. They're an amazing group of kids, right? They learn how to do the programming on the computer. They thought through the scoring elements each year. What do they got to do? And they're very dedicated, very clever. And I just sit there and I watch them. I'm really amazed. Off they go. They are wonderful kids, and they all know they're getting a letter from me for the college application.
Wonderful.
And, this year we didn't get to Worlds, but we captured the state championship in Pennsylvania on that alliance, and we reached the semifinals both in New York and New Jersey. So
that's pretty good for your second year in the game.
Yeah, it's quite a group.
That's just astonishing. One of the things that a buzzword that's so popular these days in science and in other areas of education is the word innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I think I call it a buzzword because I think it's been overused. It's a good excuse for developing new programs or combining new programs with more established ones. How do you feel about that?
Well, we do try to innovate here at Columbia. We have a department chairman, Mr. Levin, who's terrific, and he does give his teachers some leeway. You know, there's some schools where everything is lockstep. Here's the curriculum from day one to day end, and you got to do this on this day, this on that day, and you can't deviate 10 inches from that. Well, Mr. Levin does have a curriculum for each of the courses. You have to fulfill that, but he allows teachers some experimentation. And I've gone to him with different proposals, and he said, let's try it. So we try things in my physics class. And so far, I'm the only one goofy enough to go try and do it. Excuse me.
One of the things that I see in your biography, which I find intriguing, is haiku poetry day,
Yeah, haiku poetry.
Where students craft poems about physics using haiku and related poetry forms. Haiku, of course, you didn't know this, but it's one of my favorite hobbies, and has been for a long time. Writing poems that have some influence with nature or a particular time of the year, seasonal, and the form is very strict. 17 syllables divided into 3 lines of 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables.
Correct.
Of course, in Japanese, the syllables don't translate into 5, 7, 5 usually.
A little
but
bit different.
I always force mine to do that. In fact, I wrote one a couple of days ago to my wife for her birthday, which is kind of a family tradition. And it's interesting to see that you're using physics and haiku in a poetry form. How does that work for the kids?
Well, they all grumble when you when you give them the assignment. They roll their eyes and they go, "Geez, this guy's out of."
I'm not a poet. I'm a physicist.
This has got to do with physics, Mr. T, and that's usually anything I assign that isn't a problem is, what's this got to do with it? And I said, trust me. And we do it just before the holiday break in December. And I set aside a Thursday or a Friday, and we set up coffee pots and tea, and we have cookies and juice boxes and the whole thing, and we arrange it. I'm trying to think back to college back in the 60s during the Vietnam era where they had all these poetry houses and coffee houses and open mics and stuff. So it's hard to do it in a classroom. It looks like an old lab, but we try and set it up. And the kids come in, and they have to do at least 3 poems, and they have to stand up and recite a couple of the poems. And some of them are absolutely hilarious, so the kids go off on different tangents. But others try to really think about something, whether it's light or heat or force and stuff like that. And we've had a few published in Guild Script over the years, the school's literary magazine.
Right, which is in itself astonishing.
Yeah, I think right now the mood of the general student body is free-form poetry, or haiku is more structured, but those are trends that come back and forth. But at the end, the kids really do enjoy the day. I've had 1 year an English teacher came in. He brought some students with him and a book of poetry, and they did theirs, and he would read some back, and it was just one of those little teaching experiences where you had different faculty members sitting there talking to the kids, and they would come back. And it was really a very nice day.
Most high school science programs with which I've had anything to do when my daughters were in high school and when I was in high school, were hardly interdisciplinary. But I notice in your biography that you have a two cultures essay, mixing science and society and building from the C.P. Snow book, Two Cultures. And then there's the Catcher in the Rye approach as well. And tell us a little bit about both of those.
All right, Two Cultures was a fairly big book back in the very late 50s, early 60s about the divergence between the literary community in Great Britain and the scientific engineering community. And that was very popular and discussed a lot in the 60s, and it sort of went away. And I was always intrigued by it, and when I was teaching, I came to the conclusion that most of the kids that I would have in my classes were not going to be science or engineering majors. But
Right.
And many of them may not take science in college. They may take one more course in college, and that's it. And then they're sort of divorced from science. But many of the big issues of the day deal with science. And they're all over the place on that. There's teaching of evolution in schools, intelligent design. You have things about genetic engineering, designing your own child, global warming, and name it. There's a big issue.
Right.
There's an underlying scientific principle involved. And it'd be nice for kids to approach the world and understand there's politics and religion and there's science.
Right.
And how do you mix those? So I thought, let's try the Two Cultures book and see how that goes.
That sounds terrific. We're going to take a brief break, and then we'll be back with the next portion of the show.
Terrific.
And thank you very much, Alan Tumolillo. We'll be back in a little bit. Thank you.
Hi, this is former Governor Tom Kean. I answered the Jersey call to service. Now you can too. Join me and thousands of people from all corners of New Jersey in making the positive changes we need. With only a couple of hours, you can learn how to bring solutions that will cut government waste and improve the quality of life in your hometown. Answer the Jersey call to service. Go to jointhecampaign.com.
Welcome back to Neighbors and Friends, a disquisition, if you can call it that, on science and society in this program with Alan Tumolillo, who is the physics teacher, or one of the physics teachers at Columbia High School. Welcome back, Alan.
Okay.
We were talking about the C.P. Snow classic Two Cultures book, integrating science and society. And I see in your biography that you also have a Catcher in the Rye activity. That Catcher in the Rye is one of the standard English books that's taught in the curriculum. Was written by Salinger after he came back from the war in 1946. And your premise is, could the events in his book be written today with today's technology? And the students use that premise to think about the future. What will the world be like in 20 years? How is that working out?
We've done it for 2 years, and it's one of those assignments that kids roll their eyes at when it's handed out. And but a lot of them will read it for English anyway.
Right.
And I take a completely different tack. I'm not talking about alienation and all the stuff that the main character, Holden Caulfield, goes through. The book was written, it started to be written in 46. Different parts were published in magazines before it came out as a book. And that's the year, unfortunately, I was born, so long ago. So my premise is, here's one human lifetime. And what was the world like then? What's it like now? And kids have to start thinking, because I don't think they look at those books whenever they read, they read The Great Gatsby, which goes back to the 20s. They don't look at the books per se through the prism of what could they do and what can we do and how did that work out in the book. Well, in 46, there was the usual things. There was no electronics. The transistor hadn't been invented yet. Airplanes were just starting to get back into shape after World War II, so it wasn't that much air travel. The interstate highway system was still a decade off from even being proposed. All these different things just didn't exist, but people didn't feel deprived.
No.
They felt perfectly modern. And in fact, the character is a very wealthy kid because he goes to prep schools.
I can promise you, as a junior high school student that year, that no, we did not feel deprived. Hardly.
You felt as modern as you could be.
No TV. We had radio.
Right.
And we really had newspapers. Lots of newspapers. There were 7 dailies in New York City alone.
Well, I asked the kids, read the book, look at it from the perspective of the technology of the time and how that technology is the background that mediates the story. And Salinger writes many things to indicate Caulfield's alienation and weirdness and stuff. And quite a few of them revolve around the telephone.
Right.
He tries to call his sister, he tries to call some friends. He doesn't want to talk to his mom or someone else's mom. He hangs up because there's one phone in the house. It's not a cell phone because it hadn't been invented. And so all those scenes immediately go away. All this thing of trying to find his sister Phoebe completely vanished from a book if it was written today. She has a cell phone, he has one. He can text her, he can tweet her, he can email her, he can call her.
And with GPS, you can know where she's
Knows
standing.
where he is, right? But the kids also say, when they get into it, he says, oh, if he has GPS, the parents can know where he is. They didn't know, in the book, they didn't know he was thrown out of prep school, but now they would know. And so it works both ways, and the whole book would have to be a completely different book. And the kids write these essays, and they think about it. Then they start trying to figure out what the future was. And I give them the starting points. So in 91, if I were teaching in 1991, I said, what will it be like in 2011, 2012? It would be very hard for them to walk around and say, well, look, there'd be these iPhones and iPads connecting wirelessly. You can download movies, you can talk to people. It would be terrific, and these things will be more powerful than all the computers in New Jersey at once. And no one would think that. The internet hadn't been commercialized. Cell phones weighed about 8 pounds. Yeah.
Our watches have more memory than the 2 gymnasiums full of computers at Lincoln Labs in 1943.
So I want kids to think, what would they be like in their 30s? Presumably a lot of them will be settled down and start to have kids by then. And what kind of world will they see?
Right.
And, a lot of them started looking, actually, literally, in the essays I've read, a lot of them are looking in the direction of medical technology, is hoping that something, be a lot of breakthroughs. And you start to see today, kids are citing stuff like this woman, they put some kind of gear on her head, she's paralyzed, she's a quadriplegic, and they attach stuff, wrap around her hands, and the device can start to slowly read her mental thoughts and move her arm for her and grasp a cup. And she's never been able to do that ever since her injury. And that's just at the beginning. What's that going to be like in 20 years? Where maybe they can fix the injury itself with different kinds of stem cell research or other technology.
Well, there are disadvantages, though. For instance, the chiropractors have discovered a new malady called text neck, which comes from going like this. And I warned the kids, I said, how does it feel to be addicted to these things? Because pretty soon you're not going to be able to lift your head.
Well, sometimes there's more maladies as they happen to walk out in front of a truck.
Yeah.
Well, that's
or fall down a manhole.
They do things like that.
The other thing that I find intriguing is this Connections project that you're working on with them. And I remember it vaguely, but how does it fit into your advanced physics class?
I have an advanced physics class, and this is another one where I went to Mr. Levin and sought his approval because it would be time, and I make sure I have to do the curriculum as well. And I went to him and I said that I love this TV show, and he did too. And it was done by James Burke. Excuse me, it was on public television in the late 70s. There was 3 different years into the early 80s. And Burke would leave you not knowing where his end point was in the show. And he'd go back and he'd pull all these strands from history. Some ancient guy would find bauxite someplace. And some other guy, they'd find obsidian. And the guy who found obsidian, maybe his descendants would use it to make a spear or do this and that. And someone else figured out, they find it only near where there might be volcanoes. So maybe if we heated it, we heat stuff up, maybe we can make our own. And you get to glass, and you get to aluminum, and then all these other threads in history. He pulls them together, and at the end he produces things like a power plant or a television set. And it's like magic. How does he do all that? So I wanted the kids to try that. So this year we got them the DVDs and the books by Burke called Connections, and we said your target is the Apple iPad.
Ah.
And we broke the class into teams. One did the aluminum industry, one did glass, because the front of it is called
Right.
Gorilla Glass, and it's pretty sophisticated stuff. One focused on electronics, one on software, application, and operating system, and one focused on what's called information or coding theory,
Right.
when it communicates with the cell site, how you get information onto the lightweight. And they really got into it, and each group, they worked on it from November to now. It wasn't like continuous, but they met outside of class. They worked as a group. The team leaders learned how to lead a group, and they did very well. Each team eventually put together a paper and a presentation on their core area, and then the 5 team leaders produced, in the form of a presentation, a connection show, putting all the different things from different things, weaving it together into a story which results in all these advances that ultimately end up as an iPad.
I'm assuming that you have some idea of how far ahead your students are going to be when they get to college.
Well, I think that for that class, I've had the luck of teaching an advanced physics class each year for the past 3 years. And they are an extraordinary group of students. I have to admit, they really are terrific. They work like crazy. They seem to enjoy school. They're heavily involved in a lot of other things. And I think they're going to do well. And in fact, from this class, we just started a program this year at Columbia of recruiting students into the Intel Science Talent Search program.
Wow.
And out of the, there's 3 or 4 in that class, and there's a group of freshmen, a very impressive group of freshmen, who so far have indicated interest. We'll see how they do by the time they're seniors. I don't think we're going to win first place, but just to get kids into the idea that they can really do serious research.
Well, the other thing is competitive learning. One of the funny story, my daughter, who works and runs a modern dance company in New York, has a son who, when he was 5 years old, was riding on the Staten Island Ferry with his mom when she turned to him and said, "Alex, what are you going to be when you grow up?" And Alex said, "Well, Mom, I'm really torn. I'm not sure if I'm going to do paleontology or microbiology."
He's 5, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this woman sitting next to my daughter pokes her in the rib and says, "Whatever happens to cop and fireman?"
Yeah.
Well, Alex is now at the Middle School of Science and Technology in New York, so if I can persuade them to move to Maplewood, I think he'd be a great candidate.
Yeah, or get him into Stuyvesant in New York. That's
sure.
Stuyvesant's one of those schools that only has like 6,000 kids doing Intel.
One of the things that I find intriguing is that you ask your physics students to do term papers.
Yeah.
That's a pretty major departure for science.
Well, it is. I'm not sure if the biology teachers do that. There may be
None that
some
I know.
do. But when I was in college, physics major at the University of Illinois, I was taking a quantum mechanics course, and the teacher, full professor, he said, "You're going to do a term paper. It has to be typed." Now, this is 1966, 67 school year. And everybody's groaning, just like my kids did. Term paper. This is physics. And he made us do term papers. He assigned topics and stuff like that. And of course, they didn't have word processors then. You had typewriters, and you had to handwrite in all the not archaic, but the weird symbols in there. And I had a friend help me type it, like, that's how I typed. And so we had to do a term paper, and it always stuck with me that this was a hardcore quantum mechanics course, heavily focused on problem solving. Illinois was what we call a factory school. They gave you a ton of homework every day. Boom, boom, boom. And you had to turn
you
it.
had Argonne Labs too. Not too
The
far.
university ran Argonne Labs.
Right.
We shared it with University of Chicago. And so we did the term paper, and it stuck with me is, what's so bad about having these guys write a paper? And let's go back to high school.
Right.
And for the advanced physics class, their term paper is the group project on connections. For all my other classes, my honors group, they write a term paper, and then the weaker classes, the ones that, you know, kids have math problems and stuff like that, they have to do a PowerPoint presentation. And the kids have to do either a biography or how something works or carry out an original research project. And I've had different things over the years. I've been doing that for about 4 or 5 years.
That's an absolutely extraordinary gift that you're giving these kids.
Well, they don't want to do it at the beginning, but then they learn something. And I've had kids come up there and one will do a biography of Lisa Meitner. She was a very important person in physics in Germany, but she was Jewish, she had to flee.
She was a woman.
And she was a woman, and she was one of the people who participated in figuring out something with the nucleus. And the 2 guys she communicated with, they won the Nobel Prize, but she was excluded from it. So they poo-pooed her research.
Well,
but people did that, and you could see the kids in the class listening, understanding that there's some really smart people who've been ignored by history.
That's absolutely wonderful. And you've told us things about the science program at Columbia that I think many people were unaware of. And I thank you for that.
Thank you for having me here.
I've really enjoyed having Alan Tumolillo, physics, I almost said professor, but you certainly act like one, for Columbia High School. And let's close with my favorite quote from William Butler Yeats, the great Irish poet. And this is perfectly germane to what you're doing. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And with that, thank you for coming by for Neighbors and Friends, and we hope we see you the next time.